Hi, happy Thanksgiving if you celebrate that. If you don't, may this still be a day of thanks for you, a period of the year where you can reflect on the year and with gratitude and look forward to the transition of winter into the new year. Wherever you are, this is still a period of time of seasonal change, even if you don't have the same type of seasons. It's definitely, even if your years don't even start at the same time, because I think the Chinese New Year is different. I think it's different in different parts of the world. But it's still a great time to look back on the past, 11 months or so and reflect with a sense of gratitude. And to really take the time just today to think about the things that you're thankful for. Gratitude is the key to contentment. And, happiness comes in a lot of different forms, but it's momentary. And that's part of the blessing of it, is because it kind of gives you that drive to continue to seek out happiness. But contentment is deeper than that, is a sense of fulfillment even when you're not in active receiving mode. Being grateful is a way of being in an active mode of receiving, even when you aren't actively being given something. You can recognize actually that you are always being given things to be thankful for, but there's so much to be thankful for. Happiness will drive you to pursue more and greater things that are fitting for you, and happiness will help you be able to learn yourself and be able to define yourself and the life that you want for yourself, and those things are all good. But contentment is to not have to have anything going right, to anything adding up, and to still be able to find reasons to be thankful, so both are necessary. But what we're reflecting on right now, Christmas time, the very end of the year, that's a great time just to be happy as we move into the next year, as we take on new things, as we let go of old things. But we're not quite there yet. Right now it's just about focusing on the contentment so that that happiness can be something that's actually far more sustainable. There is sustainable happiness, but again, it isn't necessarily as consistent, where contentment is, as I say, not necessarily consistent. We have the Wheel of Fortune that dropped out as I was shuffling in the reverse, which is a great one. It's in a sense of inconsistency. So that's good. Okay, right. We're shuffling. It's telling me that we're on point with what I'm saying. I was actually reminded earlier too that the words that we say are very important, and you are what you say you are is the message that I saw. I can speak from experience that that's true. When I was struggling with depression, which was a long-formed habit, I had severe depression, extremely severe depression from the time, it started when I was about 6, was when I first started to really notice it. But I didn't know what to call it back then. And I didn't get diagnosed until I was 26. But I knew that I was experiencing it. I just didn't know what it was called. I didn't really understand what it was that I was experiencing, but I knew that I didn't, not only did I not feel right about things, it wasn't like that. I felt the weight of the world. I remember my 6th birthday actually being a peak of that. It kind of started to set in at that age. And by 8 years old, I was in active suicidal ideation, and trying to act out on that. I was really self-destructive, and I was hiding a lot of those things, and that carried through for a very long time. But back then, I also, because of that, it didn't really set in until puberty. I had been bullied all the time regardless. I was kind of an annoying kid. I struggled making friends. I was weird. I didn't develop the same way that other kids did, as quickly with some things socially. school was hard for me. There was a lot, and it's the ADHD that was undiagnosed as well, but I just struggled as a kid, but like I didn't know where to place any of those things until I hit around puberty. And even then, like it really mostly just the depression set in. That's also when the gender dysphoria really started to kick in. Puberty really hit me hard. Well, it hit me like a truck. I was suddenly in a very developed woman's body, but hadn't even processed fully yet that I was a girl. I was really confused, and that also added to a depression. And I started to be able to. I knew what it was at that point. I think that term was being used socially. I mean, I grew up in sheltered Christian circles where psychology was essentially kept out, but I still, had access to television every so often, and just to, I didn't really grow up listening to like the radio or anything like that, but I still lived in a world where those things were being communicated to some degree. So although I wasn't diagnosed, and although my family didn't discuss those things, and, those things weren't a part of my personal experience, they still were something that I became aware of. And, that's when I started really getting self-destructive, or it just kind of progressed at that point. But it was around that age as well when the bullying kind of seeped into my identity. And, because I developed very quickly, in the way that I developed, like I got real chubby real quick. I grew hips, I grew breasts, I was chubbier than most of the girls, and just bigger than a lot of the girls that I was around. I had other girls that were bigger than me too, but most of my close friends were all very petite, and they took a little longer to develop. And so I always felt very, very awkward in my body that way. And I started to take on a lot of the bullying into my identity, to the point where I learned very quickly. My family's very humorous. They love cracking jokes, and especially inappropriate jokes or self-degrading jokes or degrading jokes in general, those types of things, edgy. And I learned very quickly that making fun of myself prior to anybody else being able to make fun of me kind of saved me a lot of the embarrassment that I was constantly experiencing. So I started to become very self-degrading, and it honestly became a way to make friends, and a way to make partners. People saw it and were like, oh, well, at least you're self-aware, and humble, apparently, is the way that those things came across, when really I was just being self-degrading, or self-deprecating, rather. Well, both. But that bullying, as it had seeped in, and as I started to kind of, I'd put it out there first just to protect myself from other people doing it, right? And that I succeeded in that to a degree. But the thing was that internalizing that voice, internalizing those statements, stuck with me to the point where then I was constantly talking down on myself, always. And even if people would compliment me, I'd be like, well, they might feel that way, and that's very nice, but I don't feel that way, because I can look in the mirror and see that, I know what people see. It's what I at least thought back then. And then it seemed to be valid for the fact that, especially boys, never liked me, and they were always the first to point out all of my flaws. And my mom was also really good at pointing out my flaws. And those voices stuck in the back of my head for an extremely long time, to the point where as an adult, I remember the term negative self-talk came into my reality. And it took a couple years for me to properly assess that before I really was able to even recognize it. And it took a couple more years even after recognizing it before I could even begin to really get on top of it. Because I would be in cycle, speaking extremely negatively about myself, convincing myself of extremely negative concepts of myself before I'd even notice. I really didn't even notice those things until I saw them actively blocking me from different things I was trying to do, and kind of keeping me from different things, or validating certain toxic behaviors. And again, even that was, it took years. I went to therapy for 6 years, and then it took even years after the therapy for me to really be able to understand those things at all. So around 30, when I was around 30, which was, if you've seen my other videos, it was around that time in 2020 when I started to drink, which I was not something that I normally had done, but I was trying to drink myself to death. And that's when I noticed my my negative self-talk in a real, very particular way. And I think in part, interestingly enough, it came from Facebook memories. Okay, sorry. It came from Facebook memories. Actually, it was, so during that year, I started to try to work on my perspective and to try to push myself. That was the first year that I really overcame my depression after trying to kill myself yet again with the drinking, right? I had actively tried to kill myself other ways. This was supposed to be an easy way out, and it proved not to be that. So then at that point I realized, man, I'm putting so much time and energy into just wanting to die, and I've never really put that time or energy into wanting to live. And maybe, it's not that I want to die. Maybe it's that I just don't want to live a life that's like this. And maybe if I put my energy into making a life I actually want to live, I'll feel differently. Surprise, surprise, that is exactly how it works. But that was the importance of what I was telling myself. It was manifesting the things I was telling myself. Every single time that I was being cynical, saying life wasn't worth living, everything was hopeless, nobody cared about me, I was just validating that for myself. And that was not the case. None of that was ever true. That was all an illusion I was carefully crafting for myself to be able to validate a low sense of purpose and a low self-esteem. And when I realized I didn't want to keep doing that, I started to change that. And like 2 years afterwards, actually, it was in 2022 when my Facebook memories had come up. And the whole year I kept noting that the communications I was having at that time had a stark contrast to the way that I was communicating just 2 years prior. And when these memories would come up, I would be extremely self-deprecating. And you could tell when I was going through bouts of depression just by the way I was communicating. I couldn't back then. And I made everything kind of like a joke. And so I don't think a lot of people recognized either, because they had never seen the contrast of what I could be like when I was actually being positive. But after a couple years of making those changes, I could actually see that difference. And other people started to see that difference as well. I'd always tried to be positive, but I was always very down on myself. And once I started changing that communication, I started taking care of myself very differently. I started taking care of my life very differently. I started handling my responsibilities very differently. And to see that difference was extremely impactful, because I realized, I could look back and be like, wow, at this time during the year, I was communicating to myself this way. And then this is where my life was at that time. Well, no wonder. I wasn't even giving myself a chance. And so now, it's become quite a habit of mine, and this is how I've consistently kept from struggling with depression. I get little bouts every once in a while where I still feel it, but I think that that's the normal human experience at this point. It's not an issue that I constantly deal with. It's not something that overtakes my life and then overtakes my personality, where that had been the case for such a long time, for the majority of my life. And it's not like that anymore, because every time I catch myself talking negatively, I catch myself. It took a long time. It took years of me cultivating this practice to be able for it to actually become a skill, to be able to recognize when those things are starting before the whole cycle has set in, and to cut those things out, to replace those things with positive, concepts. And gratitude, cultivating a full, what would I even put, an identity that's attached to gratitude really is what it's become. But like cultivating that sense of thankfulness in my heart over time has become that, like a whole aspect of my identity, to where, you know, the second that I'd be like, man, everything just sucks, I'd be like, no, 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 no. Don't just be lying to yourself just because it's convenient. We're not doing the convenience thing anymore. Everything isn't terrible. Most things aren't even terrible, to be honest. It's a matter of perspective. Things have been a lot worse. And as hard as it is, and as much of a struggle as it is, quit letting yourself let the negativities add up to a point that you feel like you have this giant pile of negativities you're constantly having to weed through. Why not build a pile of gratitude that you can pull from any time that those negativities come up? Watch what happens. Because that's what I was doing forever. It was like, I was abused this way, I was taken advantage of this way, I was betrayed this way, I missed out on this thing, I experienced this loss, and all of those things were adding up into this giant pile of overwhelming cynicism. And none of that was it was valid in its time and place, but exactly outside of that is when gratitude was necessary. And the thing was that I did not have this giant pile of gratitude to pull from at that point, which is all a matter of perspective. But I hadn't been building on that. So every time something bad would come into my life, instead of being able to counter it with something positive, I just let it pile up and I let it defeat me. Once I got out of the mindset of I want to be defeated, I literally got into the mindset of I don't want to be defeated. I want to defeat this bullshit. I don't want this to be a part of who I am. This isn't a positive reflection of who I really want to be. This isn't who I am. This isn't who I want to be. It took years, again, but it was worth it. Every step of the way, I started seeing that it was worth it. Within 2 years, which went by very quickly, by the way, there was so much that happened during that time that felt like eternities, and it was multiple lifetimes, just between 2020 and 2022. However, it, in retrospect, went by very quickly. And being able to look back in 2022 at 2020 and to see the stark contrast of where I had been to where I had come was so rewarding. And that's when I realized this is worth it. This really, really is worth it. At that point, I realized I wasn't even still trying to overcome those things. I succeeded. I had overcome those things. But now it's a consistent work. But I made the work so much easier when I changed my mindset. And over time, when I created that habit and that sense of stability, and that's all anything is just a matter of habit. So it's very important to pay attention to the things that you say to yourself, about yourself, and then to the ways that you choose to validate those concepts. Because that's what we do. We tell ourselves things and then we validate it with our active experience, our choices in our everyday lives. And if you are telling yourself that you're not worthy, you're going to act that out. Even if you don't realize that you're doing that, subconsciously you will just act that out because you are trying to validate yourself. Your brain doesn't like lying to itself. It doesn't like receiving lies. That's where lies even come from, is because it wants to convince itself that these things are true. Lying is just a very, very clever way of trying to convince oneself of something that isn't true or that is inaccurate. And to have gratitude on your heart really starts to cut into those illusions and into those lies and expose them for what they really are, and makes them easier to swallow, easier to manage, easier to process, because it's not this heavy weight of swords that you're stabbing into your own back or that you're letting other people stab into you. It becomes this, okay, nope, I see what that is. It helps me understand myself better. It helps me understand my reality better. I understand my capacities for things better, my desires for things better, and it helps you to move forward that way. Gratitude is the key to contentment, and it's huge. So even if you don't celebrate Thanksgiving, let this be a day that you celebrate life and that you celebrate all of the things that there is to be thankful for, because there is always so many things to be thankful for. Okay, let's do this. I don't know exactly how I'm going to go about this because I took these cards out and then I also took out the oracle cards. So I guess Maybe I'll do it backwards from the way I did last time. The last time I took out 3 oracle cards. And then I let these speak for it, but I think I'm going to take these. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see what comes out. I never know how a read is going to go until the cards are actually out. Okay, so these all came. I'm working now. I swear we will get to the point where I can show you what I'm doing as I'm doing it. It's just very difficult from this setup. I mean, I can try. Part of the things that I need to be able to see myself because it's not because I'm conceited. I mean, I am conceited, but only because I'm like very concerned with. I'm conceited because I'm concerned with how other people may view me, and with trying to figure it out for myself, which is basically delusional. But I like to be able to also see myself when I talk because my expressions help the communication. I very much use my whole body to communicate. So being able to see myself feels like I can communicate better because it feels like I'm talking to somebody else. I am talking to somebody else because eventually you'll watch this video, but you're not here with me right now, so this helps. Sorry. Also, then it's not just a video of my tits. Okay. Let's see. I don't know how these... Interesting. These didn't come out. I didn't really pay attention. They might have come out on their sides. Okay, but this is how I have it. What you can't see is that there is also a card up here. So I guess the way that this is going to go is that the cards on the top and the bottom, I'm going to have these middle cards that are face down actually be the main focus. And then I'm going to let these cards speak for the contrast, and these cards on the top and bottom are going to, it almost feels like I'm going to be speaking like from the future and from the past and kind of bringing it all together. But the top is going to speak on leading into the future, and the back is going to speak on kind of coming from the past. Okay. I don't know where the oracles are going to come in yet. But let's begin with this. Okay. So we have the Strength card in the upright. And we have the Four of Swords in the upright. I'm going to start with these two, and then we're going to break it down into the time process. Okay. I'm going to do it with these two too. Because I guess, I mean, in this card, in this Four of Swords, you see that these two dudes are sleeping. The one on top of the other, but they're sleeping and they're protecting themselves. They have a sword while they're sleeping. They also have these swords on the wall in a picture, but they have a sword while they're sleeping. And it's like he's being able to sleep comfortably because he has this protection, right? But the Strength card is talking about moving forward with a confidence in oneself. You know, we have Jake who's like, he's the brave one, really. I mean, it's not. Finn is brave too, but like Jake is like a beast. Jake can change into anything and is always like, you know, being kind of the wise one. He's wise. And so it's kind of giving me that, like, there are habits that every one of us has established in our own consciousness, that we use as coping mechanisms, that we use to feel comfortable and to feel confident. This person is fast asleep, but like they have the confidence to be able to be fast asleep because they have this sense of security around them, right? However, what I'm seeing in this contrast of change and like given what I was just talking about, there is a need to level up from this, because we're no longer supposed to be asleep. We're supposed to be waking up to the lives that we truly want to live, which takes strength and takes a lot of courage. Let me tell you what, it really, really does. But what's so cool about that is that you actually cultivate strength and courage as you go through this process. So like, although that's what it requires, the universe does not ever require anything of you that it isn't already trying to give you. It's almost just about letting go of your concepts, these coping mechanisms, in order to become aware of what it is that the universe has given you and is trying to give you in order to level up to that next thing. This serves as being able to see what it is that is expected of you. But when you can see what's being expected of you in the future, you can also pick that apart to find how you're already being given that, and then how to release that in order to get to that space. And sometimes that process is super easy. It's literally just about letting go of the ego, and suddenly all of these things fall into place. Sometimes it's really hard. Sometimes defeating that ego is very hard. Sometimes it feels like having to walk away from an old friend that they're sleeping together, like that you've felt so comfortable with, that you felt so safe and secure with. And it feels very scary stepping out away from that. But that's the importance of having strength. As you notice here in the strength card, he doesn't have a weapon. He's using his creativity to establish this confidence. He's using music, and he's being very soft in that sort of way. And so it's about that too, where like you can trust in the emotional development that the universe is asking of you and is pushing you towards. You don't have to stay on the constant defense this way with these coping mechanisms, which goes back into what I was talking about. I learned how to shit talk myself first so that when other people even attempted to shit talk me, it wouldn't hit me. That was my defense. I picked up the swords myself and started stabbing myself first and created this thick scar tissue in order to protect myself, and that served for a time. I'm not saying that it didn't. I would never recommend it though. I would never recommend it, and the universe wouldn't recommend it either. It is understanding of why you've had these coping mechanisms. I needed to be able to rest, and that was the only way I knew how to rest. It's not saying that these things are evil. It's just saying that these things aren't going to be fully necessary in the future, and that it's important to be able to release these things, because what we really want isn't to establish a future world that's built on the need to defend oneself. And when you continue to support this idea that you need to be on the defense, you're only supporting that that's the type of world you want to manifest. When those are the ways that you are putting your energy, those are the things you are manifesting for yourself. When you decide you don't want to have to defend yourself anymore, you don't want to keep living this life that makes you feel like a constant victim. You don't want to have to keep fighting so hard for seemingly so little. You want to be able to step into a space where you feel confident without having to have these swords claiming your confidence. Because ultimately you start to realize that those swords aren't your confidence. You actually lack confidence. You just have a skill of using swords. And maybe you don't want to have to keep fighting anymore. You don't want to be waging war. Maybe you want to pick up a violin and make some music. Maybe you want to be able to be soft without it feeling scary and like a potential threat, because now you're exposed and now you're incapable of protecting yourself. Jake is never afraid of being able to protect himself because he uses his creativity. He's able to transform himself into anything he could possibly imagine. And it's all just based on, can he imagine what he needs in order to move into that space? And as long as he can, then he can be confident. So we're in a time and space right now where the universe is asking us to let go of those comforts and conveniences that have served us for a time, but it's trying to show us that these things aren't serving us anymore. They're keeping us asleep comfortably, but we're not in sleep time right now. We're in the middle of a spiritual war. We really, truly are. Your soul is at stake when it comes to those things. And there's so many people that are like, yeah, but I'm tired. I'm just really tired. I just don't want to do the work. And I get it, but the only reason you feel that way is because you've become lazy spiritually. You've become lazy emotionally. You've become lazy in your own personal aspect of self. In order to get out of that, I mean, it's the same sort of thing. When I was super overweight and constantly struggling with my weight, my body ain't super great right now. I could always do much better, but I'm in far better, like my body's far better off than it ever has been. And when I used to not take care of myself, it was so easy to get in these habits of eating fast food constantly, eating just shit, whatever I just felt like at any given time, whatever I could afford at any given time, drinking way too much caffeine, having way, way, way too much caffeine, smoking, drinking. I didn't really drink much, but I smoked. I smoked pot and cigarettes and was constantly given to those things. Not even because they were even doing anything for me. It was just a habit. And I'd gotten in this habit of these very unhealthy lifestyles. I also would stay up way too late. I wouldn't really sleep in. I really wasn't getting good sleep at all. I was just, and then on top of that, then I'd be given to sexual promiscuity in order to validate myself in some type of way, or in order just to feel something. And I was really given to a lot of unhealthy behaviors, and that's because I had built that habit up in myself. And then I'd be like, well, now I'm too tired, I'm too overwhelmed, I'm too burdened, I'm too depressed, I'm too, insecure in order to do the things that the universe is expecting of me. And I felt like it was such a high expectation. But the second that you start, just work out for 5 minutes today. It's nothing. It's literally 5 minutes of your day that you're giving to yourself. Do whatever little workout that it is, right? Go for a walk, do some crunches, do some sit-ups, do some squats, clean. That can be a way to also work out. Now you're killing two birds with one stone. But when you give yourself 5 minutes a day, that slowly starts to get easier to the point where now you can give yourself 10 minutes a day. Now you can give yourself 15 minutes a day. Now you can give yourself 30 minutes a day. Now you can give yourself a whole hour a day where you are dedicating yourself to your betterment and you're investing into yourself. And the thing is that when you begin to invest in yourself, whether emotionally, physically, intellectually, or spiritually, you reap the rewards of those things. You get to, because you're investing into yourself. When you are investing into other people in hopes that they give you what it is that you're looking for, what you find is that unless that person is also investing into themselves, your investment into them never usually returns back to you the way that you would hope. Because you don't get to determine those things. You're investing into somebody else. I'm not saying don't invest into others, but what exactly are you investing into others if you're not investing into yourself? Which goes back into the other readings I've had, where if you do not receive love for yourself properly, how can you know what it is that you're giving to others? You can't call that love. You don't even know what love is. And if you do know what love is, you're actively fighting against receiving it. So how do you have it to give to others? It doesn't make any sense. You have to invest into yourself. And so that's, again, also what's so cool about that is what the universe is asking you to do is to invest in yourself. And what it's telling you is that by investing into yourself, you will literally cultivate the very skills that is needed for you to be able to invest into yourself even more. No longer will you feel the desire to be so lazy spiritually, physically, mentally, emotionally, because you've invested into yourself to the point where those things come so much easier. They don't feel like that burden anymore. You can overcome these things. I have overcome depression. I had major depression where every few months, I could go a couple months being pretty okay. During those times, though, I was also given to unhealthy behaviors in order to cope. And when those things stopped sufficing for long enough, because I hadn't cultivated gratitude in my heart, I would fall back into a depression. And every time I fell into the depression, it got worse and worse and harder and harder and heavier, to the point where 3 times a year, I was completely having to isolate myself for my own mental health and I wasn't isolating myself to protect myself or to keep myself healthy or because that's what I enjoyed. I was isolating myself because I didn't want to be around people when I was potentially that close to killing myself. That's just being honest. That's how extremely unhealthy I was. That was happening year round. I'm in a place now where I am happy to be alone and I isolate because I know to protect myself and because I don't want anybody else ruining the investments that I've made in myself, and I actually like myself. I love myself. I love taking care of myself. I love being able to provide for myself. It makes me feel very good to be able to do good things, to be able to know that the things that I have to offer are valid and stable. I couldn't offer that before because I didn't have the validation of myself or the stability within myself in order to rest assured in those things. There was always this fear that if people got close enough or if things went on long enough, the true me would be revealed. And the true me was spiritually, intellectually, emotionally, and physically lazy, which reflected as I don't actually care as much as I'm pretending that I do. I don't pretend to care anymore. I don't give a fuck. Now I literally do care about things, and I'm happy to, and I'm very thankful for things, and I don't have to give these fucks. Fuck isn't the best thing to give, by the way. Love is. Commitment is. Something stable and secure is. You don't have to give a fuck. If you're wondering why you're giving so many fucks and it doesn't feel like it's ever coming back to you in a way that is making your life better, it's because what you're giving is fuck. That's not a great thing to give. That's not a good seed to plant in order to cultivate something worthwhile. Really consider the things that you're saying to yourself, the things that you're doing. Really start to consider this self-talk and the validation that you're looking for internally, and then how you're validating externally. Don't worry about the things that you're doing, because the reason that you're doing the things that you're doing is because you are in your heart and your head the way that you are. Work those things out, and out of those things will the rest of you flow. It is out of the treasures of your heart, the things that you actually care about and the things that you actually put value into, that your heart flows. And again, if you're not putting those things into your heart and head, if all you're putting into your heart and head is a whole bunch of fucks and a whole bunch of shits, then you can't really question why a whole bunch of fuck shit is all you're getting back in return. Okay, so that's where we're at. So we got this. All right, and now we're going to introduce that coming from the past, we had the Six of Cups in transition, which in this card is Jake with these things that he cares very much for, but then there's all these dark shadows that are threatening to interfere with the things that he cares about. And he looks quite determined, but I had brought it up in a different reading before where essentially he's going to have to fight these dark shadows. And it's not going to be that easy to do when he's holding on to these things that he cares about. Eventually he's going to put these things down and have to pick up a sword, right? And that's why we learned this. That's why we learned to pick up these swords. This served a time and a purpose. And as far as the step process is concerned in maturity, this is still part of that process. It's just we should be maturing past that to the point that we don't need these swords anymore because we're cultivating something so much deeper and something so much more stable, within ourselves. We're not having to rely on these things. It's not that the Six of Cups is a very nostalgic card. It's not that these things aren't still valid and important. You can still go back to those things. But it's about the transition of these things. You can still go back to them to appreciate them, but no longer should you have to be in this space of having to constantly defend them and constantly fight for them, because we're moving past that, right? We already did that to the point that we could sleep comfortably at night with our defenses. But we're now moving past that to the point that we don't need these defenses anymore. We're learning a new defense. We're learning offense, even. The strength card is that, not to be offensive, but to be able to be deliberate and to have a strategy for protection that isn't just falling back on a sword and a shield, right? Now I can actually move forward. I can actually start to accomplish missions because I have this new skill that I've cultivated over this time. And ultimately what that's moving into is the Queen of Wands in transition. The Queen, it's this bee character. And bees are very, and they have a sunflower, so this is quite positive. This character almost looks kind of like a wasp, to be honest. But they have a bee head. And that's part of it too. I actually just recently was looking up the spiritual difference between a bee and a wasp. A bee tends to be talking about social, being very sociable, being very given to building social structures and being given to being beneficial that way, caring for others as you care for yourself, or even the care of others being a way that you care for yourself. And being able to pollinate because of that, they create honey, they create this good, sweet, incredible resource through their connection with community. Wasps often get a bad name because they tend to be dicks, but that's a self-protection method. And the difference is that bees will die in protecting themselves. If they lose their stinger, they die. So they don't want to protect themselves that way. They're not trying to use that sword if they can help it. That's why they rely on each other. But the wasp can sit there and sting you a whole bunch of times. A wasp can continue stinging you and you can die from it easier than if you... Dying from a bee is generally just because you're allergic or because you got stung by so many of them. But just a few wasps can do a lot more damage, and that's why people are intimidated by them. But wasps are also pollinators. They don't create honey the same sort of way, but the paper that they create in their nests, even ground wasps, what they do for the ecosystem is equally as beneficial. It just looks different. And, it's kind of, this is giving me that, part of it is you want to move into a place where you have that protection method, where you don't got to worry about shit because you know that you can stab somebody as many times as you need to in order to be safe, right? It's not going to kill you to hurt somebody else to protect yourself. But you also still maintain this bee mentality where I'm not just out here in self-protection mode constantly. I don't have to worry about protecting myself because I know that I'm protected because I protect others, and we all protect each other, and we all love and care for each other, and that's how we are able to create such incredible resources. So that's a great balance when it comes to those things, and that's the process that we're moving through. Okay, so let's look back on the past and consider this defense mechanism, what it looks like, what it looked like, what it still looks like, maybe where it came from, and how to incorporate it better in order to move into the strength, into a proper strength. Okay, so we have a left side and we have a right side. We have the receiving side and we have the giving side. Because I looked at myself when I said that, I realized that this is inverted. I don't know how it comes across on video, but it must come across inverted. I never pay attention. So what I'm getting is that I'm going to make this, even though this is my right side, this is going to speak for the left side because that's for the viewer, and this is going to speak for the right side. This is the receiving side. This is the giving side. So we're going to start with the receiving. We have the King of Cups in the reverse. this card with, what's the penguin's name? Oh, it's right on the tip of my tongue. I know this penguin's name, or at least I think I do. I haven't watched the episodes where he becomes whatever this character is, but I'm pretty sure this is the main penguin of the Ice King. The penguins are all associated with the Ice King, but this one is his own king, and he has his own kingdom. Okay, the Ice King has such a crazy arc, because like even in the first season or so that I actually watched the show, he goes back and forth between being evil and being even good. But generally it's just like he has like some really toxic mindsets and behaviors, and those are constantly having to be worked out, and that almost ends up being what Jake and Finn are fighting against, is like trying to teach they're like Ice King, like he's not even this like super evil character. He can tend to be, but the way that they go about it is very empathetically. But I wonder if maybe that's why, I just had his name again on the tip of my tongue. I can't remember this guy's name, but I wonder if that's in part where this character comes from. Maybe there's a point where the Ice King actually essentially becomes fairly good because he starts to heal, and he really does go through those processes of healing, and in that he becomes far less evil and given to such toxic behaviors. But then there's like a need for a new type of villain in that way. And so his penguin, this one who is like so close to him and essentially like his pet, who has been underneath him and like watching all of his toxic behavior and benefiting from all of his toxic behavior, and also being used as a pawn in all of his toxic behavior. Now that the Ice King is healed, the penguin kind of now is taking on that toxicity, which is a super common thing that happens within family dynamics. Even business dynamics, but that happens a lot, where because this person's sense of security and development during their development was based on that toxicity, that's where normalcy is, right? Okay. So this is in the reverse, right? Normalcy. I was just talking to my friend last night about how my major struggle in intimate relationships is, and now I've had this friend for 15 years. He knows me extremely well. Aside from my best friend, who I've, known for 20 years, he probably knows me better than anybody because he's maintained a relationship with me over all these years as well. He's watched me through all these things. He's always cared for me too. He's one of the most consistent people I've ever known. He's probably the most consistent person I know, really. And I was talking to him last night about how I'm realizing, that I have that part of my issue intimately is I'm always given to certain toxic behaviors, and they happen to be some of the worst types of toxicity, like not just general disrespect, or even semi-abuse. It's like straight up like, oh, this person would kill me. I'm attracted to them now. Like the absolute worst. And it's like, as much work as I do on myself, it's still hard to hit those points. And I was talking about how, so much of that comes from like the people that I grew up with, the way that they are and the way that they were with me and the way that they've continued to be, and how much worse it's even gotten over time in different ways, and how bad it's ever been. Like, that has created this sense in me where I'm like, I have this desire in me, like, and this is just being honest. I recognize that this is extremely unhealthy, right? But that I have this thing in me that wants to connect and bind myself with and love, be in a loving relationship with somebody super toxic that way, that has those types of mindsets towards me. Because if I could just figure out how to get that person to love me, it would make sense of all things. It would fill this void in my heart of wanting these people to love me, right? I've always wanted my family to love me, but the way that they love me is so toxic. It's not love. And I get now, and I can forgive them now because I recognize that they just haven't cultivated healthy concepts in themselves. So what they're always giving me is toxicity, because that's all that they have to give. And so I don't hold that against them. I feel for them. I pity them that way. But I still struggle because there's still a great part of me, the part of me that went through all of my development, not receiving fairly fundamental aspects of healthy living, healthy individualism, healthy concepts of self, of relationships, of reality. There's this void that wants to be fulfilled by their specific personalities, right? They're what I know of a family. And, you know, there's just this sense of like, if I could just do it right, if I could just figure out what I'm doing wrong and how to do it right, then they'd love me. Then they'd care. Then they would quit hurting me. But really that's not true. And that's falling here into this concept of things that we learned in order to cope that really aren't actually serving us, right? And I did learn that to cope. And part of that was because, like, you know, I grew up where, like, I would tell people things about my life and they'd be like, oh my God, that person is monstrous. You know, I remember with my ex's mom, my ex basically forced me to tell her. I hadn't even talked about my traumas to anybody else. My ex forced them out of me. And that was the first time I'd ever even talked about them. So I was like all broken up about it, feeling all weird. I don't know how it even came out. I mean, I kind of do, but like at the same time, I don't, because I wasn't used to talking about those things. When he pulled it out of me, I was extremely vulnerable and feeling victimized by him even making me talk about them. And then he took those things and told his mom, which was like the literal thing I'd asked him not to do. And the thing is, my mom used to do that to me. She used to get things out of me by telling me like, oh, I won't tell this person, like issues that I was having with my stepdad or my brothers. And she'd be like, oh, I won't tell that person. And then immediately after getting out of me, which she got out of me because she would be extremely manipulative emotionally, and I would just be vulnerable and weak and would just give her those things. And then she would immediately go and tell that person. And then I'd have to talk to that person about these issues that I hadn't even fully processed yet to even talk to her about, right? Well, my ex essentially did the same thing with me, with his mom, which was just like super traumatic. And I just didn't know how to, it was triggering my PTSD and I didn't know what to do about it at the time. This was prior to going to any therapy. And his mom was like, oh my God, like, you know, you should throw your brother in jail and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, you're not, like, I, even at the time, in all of my trauma, was like, that's not reasonable at all. You're talking about my family. You're talking about the people I grew up with. You're talking about the people that I love dearly. You're talking about the people that have been developmental, fundamental in my development. You're talking about these people that, like, are people to me. Yes, you're hearing different things and you're thinking of these people as monsters, but I know these people as people. Not just people, my closest friends and family. Like, my brother was my closest friend growing up. You're talking about people I love very much. And, like, these aren't monsters. These are people. I don't care how monstrous they've been. I don't care what somebody is capable of. They're still a person. And the second you start to dehumanize those behaviors, you're just giving them power to be inhumane. Don't do that. Don't do that. That's not helpful to the victim, and it's certainly it's not helpful to the perpetrator, and it's certainly not helpful to the victim. So, in those types of things, when I was growing up, I learned to love those people, right? And I learned to love them because that was a protection method. Well, it was also just natural. I don't think a child's going to be raised around people prior to their full development and without being able to realize what's actually going on and without knowing anything about a bigger world, without loving the people that way. And that's why we end up fucked up, right? That's why it fucks with our sense of security and our sense of healthy, a healthy mentality of relationships and things like that. it served me for a time. It served my development. It was what I had to do in order to develop. It's what I had to do in order to survive. But it's not, at this point, it's just been holding me back. At this point, it's not serving a greater purpose. In fact, it's just keeping me feeling like a victim, right? So that's not helpful. That's not helpful. So it's about not continuing to receive, in the reverse, it's about not continuing to receive this cursed inheritance, right? And that is an inheritance. When we're talking about inheritances, we're not just talking about money. We're talking about behaviors, systems, feelings, even physical traits, that have been passed down over time, and how to embrace those things and how to break this innate cynicism and negativity attached to them. Because so easily those are the things that are being passed down, toxicity. And it's about saying, no, I'm not going to claim this anymore. I'm not staying asleep to these things any longer. I'm going to wake up from these things. But here we're still talking about being asleep. And it's in the state of being asleep to oneself that we're receiving these things. And so, we're moving forward in that way, like I said, because this is the giving. But in that, so it's while we're asleep. Now, it's interesting because the penguins are associated with the Ice King, right? But she's also associated with the Ice King. I'm assuming this is his daughter or a niece or some shit. I don't know. But she's an ice princess. And, she looks quite confident, even potentially a bit arrogant. She has, her boots that are made for walking, and she's got this sword that she's levitating. She's very confident with it. But she is she's an ice queen. It's the Queen of Swords. So she's an ice queen. That's true. The Ice King is into younger women, so he must have maybe married this younger woman. Or they're related somehow, but that actually is something that's in Adventure Time, interestingly enough. It's one of the toxic aspects of him that made him a villain, that he's learned to heal over time. Bubblegum Princess, he was interested in Bubblegum Princess, and she denied him, and it threw him for a fucking loop, because I think she's technically actually very old, but she just looks very young, but he thought that she was young, and so then she, pretty much put him in his place about it. That was I do actually remember that from that. This show is insane. But what I'm seeing from this is, now this isn't being asleep with the sword. This is being quite awake and quite confident, but almost to the point of being arrogant with this sword, right? And that leads into, these unhealthy behaviors and these toxic behaviors that we've acquired over time in order to protect ourselves and the things that we care for. Again, they served a purpose. Even the negative inheritance, it serves a purpose to connect you with a sense of family and how those things work, and the importance of passing on something beneficial, because you know what it's like to receive through inheritance what isn't beneficial. But this is once it's become this skill, this is taking the skill into yourself, right? This is on the receiving. No, this is the giving. This is the receiving. So this is what we received, was the inheritance. This is the giving. So out of that inheritance, now we're putting out, like I said, this is just speaking internally on these unhealthy coping mechanisms. But this is the specific one of being cutting, being cold, being the first one to lay the sword, even to the point of potentially becoming cruel to some degree, in order to protect oneself. And you're totally confident and okay with that because it fits this world that you exist in. There's nothing wrong with being an ice queen when you live in Ice Kingdom, right? But the second you step out anywhere else, this is going to come across as very cutting and very cold and very unfitting for the rest of the world. So this is also speaking to me on moving out of that environment, because that's what we're doing. We're progressing right forward. What does that look like? Well, it looks like moving out of that environment, because as long as you stay in a toxic environment, you're not going to realize the toxicity. It's much harder to, at least. Even if you recognize it, you're going to have every reason to just continue to validate it, to continue to stay in it, because it supports the environment in which you exist. It's likely how the environment came to be in the first place. This would be a water kingdom if it wasn't for how cold it is, right? So like, there's this sense of, taking those things and finding validation in them, which isn't invalid, but to the point of becoming a bit of a monster yourself, of becoming cruel, becoming cold, becoming, karmic. We're looking for dharma, not karma. I believe in both. Karma is the consequence of action that, it's not that it's innately negative, because they're both technically positive, but karma is what you get when you've been acting negatively and it's trying to put you in your place. Karma is like going to prison for robbing somebody, right? That's karma. Where dharma is the justice of receiving everything that was robbed from you if you were in that position. And as long as you handle it right. But if you're somebody in that position and you're not handling things right, let's say that somebody robbed you and then you went and robbed them back. Okay, well, now you both have karma. The way that the wheel works is that way. And generally both are working all together. You don't have to receive karma. That's, I think, why we talk about karma more, is because people experience it more often. Because most of us are coming out of these spaces, and a lot of people aren't actively in the position of doing the work yet. So we're seeing karma now, and that's fine. It's part of the process. It's what it's going to take in order for us to get there. These things all serve their own purposes. It's just we don't want to stay here. We don't want to be where all of these shadows are something to fear. We want to move forward into a place where we can have genuine community. Right? And there's even like this cup of honey that's spilt over. Well, okay, he has eyes, so he's a character. It was giving me the sense of like, a little bit of a sense of maybe being, like throwing caution to the wind. What's the word? Being a little, not lackadaisical, being not really thinking about it. You spilled the honey. But at the same time, it's also like, honey is such a valuable resource that like, if you can throw caution to the wind enough that you can spill an entire jar of honey, like, then you must be highly abundant, because you wouldn't, accidentally lose $350 if you didn't have any money. At least if you weren't being flippant, is the word I was looking for. So there's kind of like this idea of being able to be that flippant, because you have all of these resources. You have this abundance in the community. But with it also being a character, I'm getting nothing yet. We'll get to that. But I'm noting now that it's a character. Okay, so what we're moving forward into is releasing these past coping mechanisms that we're recognizing served a time and purpose, being thankful for what they served, and then releasing them because they're no longer serving us. They've become toxic, or they were innately toxic, and even if they served us for a time, we're letting that go. We're moving forward. So we're moving from this position of using those things as a defense and potentially becoming cold, and we're moving out of toxic environments into the Knight of Coins in the upright. So we've got this lemon guy from Lemon Kingdom, apparently, because he's also on a lemon camel. A lemon candle sounds great, though, now that you mention it. A lemon camel. I don't know why that's so hard for me to say. And he has a pentacle. Now, normally the Knight of Coins is like being able to give of one's abundance in the upright. Like, it's not the Ace of Coins, because the Ace of Coins is receiving abundance from the universe. It's like receiving abundance from a person, some sort of material investment or wealth from a person, or being the person yourself that's able to give of material abundance that way. But he does look, and this character, I remember being a weird character. He has a weird voice, and he's just, he's kind of toxic himself. I mean, he's bitter, right? He's a lemon. He's kind of sour. And yeah, he does have that personality, and he's also just weird and goofy. Really weird. But in this image, I don't know if you can see his face well, but he looks very suspicious. He looks very suspicious, and he's looking back behind him. And I would say that seems, when you put it next to the Strength card, it seems reasonable, because it's like, you've learned now what your abundance is, what this inheritance is that you've received, and now you've moved out. Interestingly enough, we've moved out of the Ice Kingdom, which these both represent, and both of these cards are in the Lemon Kingdom. So we're moving on to something better. But we've also moved into something potentially bitter, something a little bit sour. But lemons are also sweet and delicious, and I like them raw, and I like them with salt, or with like a little tahini. They're great, lemons and limes. But that's also an acquired taste. Okay, so now we're maturing. That's like a sense of maturity. I remember where it's like, oh, wine, alcohol, caviar, anything like that. Those are all acquired tastes. To acquire taste is a reference to maturity, for the fact that it takes time and skill and development in order to acquire it, right? So it kind of goes hand in hand with a sense of maturity. But it's also, being able, well, in one hand, to recognize what is good for you, even if it wasn't something that was originally so comfortable or so convenient. But coming to a point of being able to receive those things because you know that it's good for you, it's healthy, it's better than whatever the alternative was. But it's also in the sourness of it. It's like being able to recognize now the bitterness of, it's a bittersweet. Right? It's a bittersweet feeling of, we're letting go of all of these things, and all of this past and all the things we've held on to. We're letting go of this bitterness I had against my family that somehow secured me and sustained me for such a long time. But like, even with forgiveness also comes grief, and that's normal, and that's okay. So we have this bittersweetness going on, and it's okay. We're strong. We can handle this. We can make music of it, even. It's like that idea of like, it's generally so much easier for the average person to create a sad song than a happy song. We also tend to love sad music. We love to, as soon as your heart is broken, suddenly all these songs start pouring out. It's a natural part of our experience. But you do have to go through this process of letting your heart break in order to get to that point of being able to make this music as well. And like, you'll notice like that these cards, this one is icy and blue, but this one is also actually definitive of the Ice Kingdom, even though now he has his own kingdom and it's all green glass. He's treating it like it's like he's just hoarding gold like a dragon, but it's all just broken glass. So it's not even something necessarily safe. And then, these guys live in a tree, but it's like also like electronic somehow. I don't know. But this is almost like a false sense of security, right? That's what we've been talking about. And so like in the past, all of these things, like this is all cold and sharp edges. This is literally broken glass. This is only a false sense of security. This man can't protect himself. He has to rely on this other thing to protect him. These are still being completely surrounded by shadows and in a threatening way. But as we're moving and as we're maturing, we're moving into each one of these cards now has a yellow background. And yellow is definitive of positive energy, of happiness, of abundance, of newness, light. It's kind of like, when summer first starts and it's this feeling of, okay, we're free for a time. There's this bit of pleasure in that. So we're moving into a point where, like, despite the fact that these are lemons, it's also quite positive. We have started to cultivate that capacity to be able to see the positive in things, even when things are innately negative. There's always an innate positivity too, and it's really a matter of perspective. Now that's bringing up we got a bit of PTSD going on here, right? Despite the fact that we now have an abundance to give and or to receive, there's that bittersweetness of, but we know what we've been through, and we kind of feel like we have to look over our shoulders just to be safe and secure. And that actually is leading into how I had brought up this being like, this is like learning an offense, and it's not to be offensive, it's to learn how to protect yourself through some strategy. But there is a bit of, especially when you first go through this process, there is a bit of offensiveness. There's a bit of paranoia. And so then you're, more apt to have to protect yourself. You become a little offensive because you're not on the defense anymore. Now you're like, well, fuck you. Fuck you. Well, fuck you. But that's part of this healing process, and that's okay. It's okay. It's okay to cut people off, and like people that actually love you and care for you and are meant for you, you can cut them off and then later come back and be like, you know what? I was wrong for that. I'm an idiot. And they'll be like, I know. But like some people you cut off and they'll be like, what a piece of shit. I never want anything to do with that person again. And it's like, okay, well, good thing I cut you off then. So you have to be able to trust yourself and move into that for sure. And it's okay to be a little paranoid, but this is still part of the process to move forward. This bitter sweetness is going to move into pure honey, right? So we just keep moving forward. And like I said in another reading too, we're not talking about things being so sweet that they are fake. This is honey. Like this is the best kind of sweetness there is. It's gold. It's liquid gold. It really is. Where like it's not, sucrose. It's not high fructose corn syrup. It's real. It's the real deal. And it's the real deal in part too because it's being cultivated out of ourselves. So it holds such a high value because nobody else can do that. We can do that. And we do it out of ourselves, right? Okay. But so that's on the giving. It's okay to give a little bit of offense. It's okay to be a little bit paranoid. It's okay to take on those things and to be putting up those boundaries that way. In fact, this whole process here in strength is learning when to have those boundaries and when to be able to be creative with the things that you have in order to be able to be confident without having to be defensive. And then we have the Hierophant in reverse. And this guy's wild and scary. So brilliant, though. This is a truly brilliant card to me. Because it's Lemon Kingdom. And he's a lemon person. And there's all these lemon people of different kinds offering lemon offerings to this high spiritual lemon lord. Right? Okay. But he's squeezing a lemon until all the juices come out here in his hand. He has a flaming wand, which is in a lemon peeler. He has a flaming lemon peeler in one hand, and he's squeezing a lemon for all the juices to come out in another. And that's like so highly depictive of spirituality. Like that's so much better than the Rider-Waite, in my opinion. This really hits deep. Because that, honestly, is so often what spirituality feels like. And that's often the fear, right? in the receiving. We're scared to receive these things that the universe is trying to cultivate within us, because we're afraid that it's going to peel us and to skin us and squeeze us of all of our essence, right? That's the whole point. And like, that the potter just wants to build me up to break me down. That this refining fire, the only point of it is to deplete me. And it's like, no, it's not. It's trying to deplete the carbon in you and to purify the gold in you. And the more that this process happens, the more you should be cultivating gold. Now, if you don't got no gold in your soul, then I guess I can see why you'd be really afraid of this process. I can see why you're still emotionally immature and lazy. I can see why you want to stay on the constant defense, why you want to stay on the constant offense, why you continue to hand out cursed inheritances, why you are still afraid of the shadows, still staying in the shadows, still holding on so tightly to the few things that you love and are willing to fight anybody for it. I can see why you don't know how to make music. I can see why you aren't giving. Because you're afraid. Because you're afraid. And you have every reason to be afraid, I suppose, if you don't have gold in your soul. But the thing is that I believe every person has gold in their soul. Like, this goes back into, too, when I was talking about the inheritances, that, like, my family, despite how evil they've been in different degrees, they're not, nobody is innately evil. Nobody is. I dated a dude that had born evil tattooed on his hands, and he believed that. And I remember just like loving him endlessly, because it was so sad to me that somebody could think that when they were born as a baby that they were evil. That's not true. That's not true. It's a learned thing. We are born golden. We are born perfect. We are born given all of the access to all of the things. We are wonderfully made. We were created wonderful and perfect. It's everything else that cultivates these concepts of evil. It's an illusion that is inherent now in this matrix in which we exist, and we take that on throughout our development. And then maturity is the process of releasing that and cultivating and integrating it in a way that ends up being positive and true and good, you know? But this sense of us being so innately evil that we wouldn't have gold in our souls, it's a lie. And when we believe the lie, we stay stuck in these past karmic cycles. But it's not true, and it's so sad that somebody made him think that somebody validated that for him ever. Because even when he wanted to kill me, I didn't consider that evil. I wanted him to kill me for a time too, to be honest. And I wasn't evil for that either. We're both stupid at best. You know, like those... This isn't what the universe is trying to do, and that's why this is in the reverse. You don't have to fear the refining fire. It is here to better you. It's here to help you remove the things that you're clinging to, the idea of evil, the idea that that's where your strength is coming from, the idea that, no, I need to be afraid when I sleep, which is why I keep this sword on me and why I keep this beast near. No, you don't. You can sleep peacefully. You can literally move through the world peaceably. You don't have to have that sword. You can use music as a defense if you absolutely needed to. You are aware now that you don't need the defense, that the world isn't against you. You know, releasing my depression looked like that, was realizing that the world isn't against me. I was just against myself. And that was valid. That was valid. I'd been trained that way. I'd been taught those things. And that was okay, because it served me for a time. It made me who I am today. And I am so thankful to be who I am today. I truly, truly am. When I was talking to my friend yesterday, that was something I talked about, because he's not a spiritual person. And I love that about him, because it helps him be such a stable person. Again, I haven't met anybody more stable than him, truly. But at the same time, he's even expressed to me how unfulfilling life feels often when all it feels like is just, so you just work, you get married, you have kids, you die. And it's just the same thing over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. There isn't this vibrancy of life for him often because he isn't intact with his spiritual self. And that's what he loves so much about me and why he appreciates a close relationship with me. But that's part of what we're working on, is him not tying his spirituality to me. He has to cultivate these things for himself. I'm not going to continue to be this beast that he can, not sleep with. We don't sleep together ever. We've never done that. But like in that, sense of this friendship that he can sleep comfortably with, because he knows that he has that defense. He has to cultivate this defense within himself, The same sort of thing. I can't rely on him for a sense of stability and security just because I have that person. I need to go cultivate those things with myself as well. And we're helping each other that way, and that's wonderful and beautiful. But this whole thing speaks on this being a deeply interpersonal relationship. It's being both the wasp and the bee. We're moving away from relying on external resources to gain these things for ourselves, and we're moving into a place where we can bring those things out of ourselves. A violin doesn't play itself. It needs somebody to play it, right? That's where the beautiful music comes from. And the beauty of the music is coming from how skilled the person is at playing it. And how skilled they are is based on the lessons that they've learned and the practice that they've put into place in order to cultivate those things, right? And so it goes back into what I was talking about at the very beginning. Habit. It's about the habit of things. Are you in the habit of speaking ill of yourself, of speaking ill of others? Are you in the habit of, being ungrateful, of being cynical, of not being willing to receive what the universe is trying to give to you because you already know better, you already have it figured out, or because you're scared, or because you've already gone through certain experiences and you already know better? Like, those aren't going to ultimately be the things that serve us. The bees don't even communicate with words, right? They don't communicate the way that animals do. They communicate the way that bugs do. They use dance. They use very specific body language, and that's the importance of each bee having its own job and then fulfilling its own job, is because then they can trust each other's body language. A bee will know if another bee is part of its hive based on scent of everywhere that it's been, because everywhere that you've been and everything that you've done dictates where you're from and where you're going. And bees know that. But it's also about the way that you move. They can tell where it's like, you don't really vibe with us, do you? I don't think you're from this hive. They require a queen in order to survive. And the whole hive will essentially suicide itself if they can't find a proper queen. And multiple different queens can come from different areas, but if it's not the right queen, if she doesn't vibe the right way, they won't accept her, and they will let the entire hive die. The entire hive in which their entire community exists. So that's the thing with this Queen of Wands too, that this queen is extremely important. This queen is the center of the universe when it comes to the community. But this is just like what I've talked about when in videos when I've talked about the Dragonborn in Skyrim. The Dragonborn in Skyrim is one character. There's two Dragonborns technically. Sorry, spoiler alert. But the other one sucks. But there's one Dragonborn in Skyrim. There's one person that's expected to save the entirety of Skyrim. But every single person that plays Skyrim is Dragonborn. That's the same way that this actual reality works, because we just live in the Matrix. There's only one Neo, right? But it's actually all of us. We're that one for ourselves. Each of us becomes the queen of the hive. But it's all about cultivating these things in order to become that queen, in order to become one that can be relied on. And the point of that is because each individual at the time of their conception and birth has been given a very unique individual aspect. They have their own individual perspective of their own individual experience. It's innate in the functioning of this reality. And because of that innateness, and because of that individuality, that single person has a singular, perfect destiny that is essential to the collective destiny and community and sustainability. Every single individual has that, and it takes stepping out of these comfort zones in order to know oneself and trust oneself truly to move into that position. Unless we have a collective consisting of self-actualized individuals, we won't have a self-actualized community, collective. It's based on the individual being those things. When you have one sick lemon in a whole bunch, it will make all the rest of the lemons sick over time if you don't remove it from the pile. One bad apple will ruin the entire bunch if you don't remove it. But we're not apples. We're metaphors, and they are metaphors for us, but metaphors for them, and they're metaphors for us. But we as individuals have this capacity to learn from our experiences, to actively engage in our experiences, to cultivate something more out of our experiences. And that's the importance of not being lazy mentally, emotionally, intellectually, or spiritually, is because that's the key. It's this function that we have within our own innate individuality to be able to take from our experience and cultivate it into something so much greater. And that is how we build the worlds that we want to live in. And again, I just want to repeat that the things that you do are actively stabilizing and supporting the reality in which that manifests out of your experience. So it's essential that you recognize yourself and recognize these things in order to know what it is you're actually manifesting. Because you can say all day, I don't want to live in a world like this, and I don't want to live in a world like this, and I don't want to feel like a constant victim, and I don't want to be depressed all the time, and I don't want to hate myself, and I hate that everything's like this, and la 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 la. But until you do the work in yourself to not view things that way and to not continue to act that way, you're just making excuses for how you are. And you're deflecting the power that is innately given to you to make things better. I promise you, I can assure you, I have been there, I've done this, I know this. Through my own experience, I've proven this to myself, and that's why I give it to you, because I know that this works. I know that it works to do the work. I know that it is worth it. And I've lived a life for 30 years where I was just trying to kill myself. Okay, there was 22 years that I was trying to kill myself. Granted, I'm only 35, okay? So I'm basically a child right now. It did not take long for me to get to this point from the time I started choosing to heal to the time that I've become healed. Now, granted, I've been doing it also my whole life, but I only realized that in retrospect and looking back to what this process has been. I didn't realize back at this point in time that I was healing, that these things were part of my healing. Once I realized that I was climbing a mountain, and then I realized that I was beating myself up. And then I realized that beating myself up was not helping me get any higher up that mountain. In fact, it was keeping me down. And once I stopped beating myself up and started giving myself the things that I needed in order to start pushing forward, and then I realized that I could actually help others, and then I had this whole community of people that were moving forward in the world, that's when things started to fall into place. And I promise you that they do. So if you're in the darkness right now and you're in the shadows, you can trust that you will come to this point, but it takes this process. It's like doing math. When you see that, or algebra rather, when you see the 3 and the 2, and then you see an X, and you're like, okay, I have no idea what X is, but you can trust the equation. You can trust the work. Because if you do it right, I always struggled in algebra because I kept doing it wrong. And my teacher was like, listen, it's very important that you have these fundamental understandings in order to move forward. Because in the end, if you don't have these foundations down properly, you might be able to succeed in some ways, but it's not going to serve you ultimately in the end. Building a strong foundation is essential. It's essential. And this is part of how you do that. It's a matter of perspective. It's a perception. It's a matter of perspective, but it's also a matter of perception. No matter where you are, it's a matter of perception, right? But you're also in control of where you happen to be at any given time. And that will help cater to your perception. These things all fold in on top of themselves. They all cycle over themselves. And if you aren't keen to that and aren't in control of that, you're going to fall into karmic cycles where You're just receiving a whole bunch of shit you aren't happy with because you're not embracing the control and power that you truly have innately within yourself. So today, focus on being thankful. Focus on being grateful. Let it start to cultivate. Let it plant that seed, and then let it start to cultivate into this tree of abundance, of all of the things that you have to be thankful for, so that you can start looking back and realizing that even these things are things to be thankful for because they were steps to get you to where you are today and to where you will be tomorrow. And let that be something that encourages you and motivates you rather than breaks you down and gives you an excuse to continue to be bitter, right? Because we want to move forward away from this bitterness into, and away from this uncertainty, and away from the confusion, and away from all the trauma, and away from all the fear, into something that's purely true and sweet. And so it's almost like, as much as we're this wasp queen and this bee queen, we're also this little honey pot. And this honey pot is not only truly sweet, but is also being poured out. And in being poured out of itself, it's got a little smirk on its face. It's got a smile because it knows that it's in the bee kingdom and that it's always going to be fulfilled. It's always going to be replenished. As long as this community is strong, it's always going to have more honey to pour out into the world. But you can't have that until you've cultivated these things within yourself. This is how you build confidence in self. It isn't by claiming a sword, whatever that looks like to you. It isn't by being cold and arrogant. It isn't by having your own little kingdom. It's so much deeper and greater than that, and so much more worth it. All right. Everything's about to die right now, my battery and my memory. So thanks for listening. I love and appreciate you. We didn't do any oracles. I guess we'll do that in the next reading. But happy giving thanks. Happy giving thanks. And I will see you in the next one.